It's time for baseball fans far and wide to admit the obvious. Aaron Judge is the best New York Yankee since Mickey Mantle.
High fly ball, deep left. There it goes, soaring into history. He's done it. He has done it. 62. Aaron Judge is the American League single-season home run leader. The AL King. Case closed.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Now, normally when someone says the phrase or starts a sentence or a paragraph with the phrase, we need to talk about, it's bad, it's a negative, stitch upcoming, but we need to talk about Aaron Judge for only good, historically important, mind-blowing reasons. And this, as it turned out, is a bit of an inflection point. This season, as we speak right now, fingers crossed, knock on wood, but this is a turning point in a career of someone who already has had a stupendous career, Aaron Judge. But what he's done so far this season is beyond absurd because he's playing, he doesn't have the home run ratio of what he did in 2022, but he's playing at a higher level, which is, it's not possible, and he's doing it. And the reality of Aaron Judge, because he came on the scene, he had the huge season in 2017, were it not for the unfortunate situation with the Houston Astros, he probably wins the MVP award that year, in addition to Rookie of the Year. And he makes more money earlier. But maybe his career doesn't play out as well. We will never know. But much as Aaron Judge scrubbed from his Instagram when he had paid tribute to the eventual 2017 most valuable player, when the scandal with the Houston Astros, when that scandal landed, he scrubbed it. Didn't say a word. But the normally affable Aaron Judge was pissed. He's a competitor. And even though, like his predecessor, Yankee captain Derek Jeter, Derek always was diplomatic. He rarely talked up his own talents, his own stats, his own achievements. It was all about the team. And the reality is Aaron Judge right now would look at Derek Jeter's career and be envious because Derek won 5 World Series. Aaron's still stuck at 0. But the thing with Aaron Judge is that he had a couple of seasons, I think 3 seasons, including last year, where he was on his way to legendary seasons like 2017, like 2022, and he suffered fluky injuries. There are people who appear to be injury prone. Ken Griffey Jr., for example, had a number of seasons hugely disrupted by injuries. But I don't know that Griffey Jr. as a younger player was injury prone so much as he suffered some really weird injuries. He hurt himself pretty badly making that famous Spider-Man catch. Sometimes you play balls out, you play at breakneck speed, you are more likely to get injured. I don't see and have never seen Judge as brittle. He has had strange injuries. What ruined not only his season in 2023, but it ruined the Yankees season. The Yankees were on pace for 96 wins last year. Judge made an unbelievable circus catch in LA and he fucked himself up. And the team collapsed after that, not coincidentally. He is, in the immortal words of Reginald Martinez Jackson, he is the straw that stirs the drink. Well, having Juan Soto hitting in front of him ain't bad. But it is time to look at Aaron Judge's place in Yankees history. And I agree with the sentiment that has cropped up, certainly during the season, as he started slowly. Oh, we got to bench him. What a waste of money. He got hurt last year. Judge is overrated. He's not that good. Yeah, okay. But we need to acknowledge the reality that he is playing at a level that the hallowed names of Yankees lore, the greatest franchise in the history of professional sports, that's the hill not that many people will fight me on. You want to come at me, Montreal Canadiens, bro? I'm right here. But the Yanks didn't win all of those World Series in a vacuum. They won it because they, spoiler alert, had the best players. Some of the greatest players in the history of baseball wore the pinstripes. And the reality is, the magical names, offensive players, but the magical names, the hallowed names, the golden-hued names in Yankees history. There's 4. And some people would argue that these would be the Mount Rushmore, and I'm not going to take issue with it. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle. No problem. I know somebody that would put Mariano Rivera above Mickey Mantle. That's arguable. It's very difficult to judge pitchers. In the case of Mariano, the best to ever do what he did, best relief pitcher who ever lived. A great equalizer, Mariano Rivera, a cheat code in human form. For huge stretches of his career, Mariano Rivera. But the reality is that you look at the numbers of Babe Ruth, his numbers are just stupid. And you really can't compare Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig to anyone else because they were doing things they were eclipsing entire teams. That's what will always set Babe Ruth apart. You can hit 62 home runs in a season, but other teams are hitting 200 home runs, 160 as a team. Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs in 1927. He out-homered all but a handful of teams by himself. That is not something that you can explain or say, well, he was overrated. Okay. I believe that Babe Ruth, as far as natural talent, may have been the most talented man to ever play baseball, period. He's up there with Shohei Ohtani. Have you looked at Babe Ruth's pitching numbers? The guy was ridiculous. He held the record for most consecutive scoreless innings in a World Series until it was broken by who? Charles Edward Whitey Ford. And who was he? The greatest left-handed pitcher in Yankees history. Sorry, Ron Guidry. We'll put you second and Pettit third. We're talking legends. More than legends. Judge is putting up numbers, and he is the kind of player, he's a 5-tool player, a legitimate 5-tooler, which means of the 5 skills on a baseball field, hit for power, run, field, throw. He's a 5-tool player. Babe Ruth, as a young man, well, obviously he was a 5-tool player, but as he got a little bit older, he couldn't really run. But young Babe Ruth could run. He could steal bases. In fact, he got thrown out stealing second to end the 1926 World Series. There's some trivia for you. I believe it's the only World Series that ended on caught stealing. Gehrig was not quite a 5-tool player. He had a good throwing arm. He's a first baseman. He could run, but he wasn't a speed burner. DiMaggio was close. DiMaggio, they say, may have been the greatest natural talent in the outfield, that he had instincts that were almost superhuman. Mickey Mantle was a 5-tool player. But you're talking, guys, Mickey Mantle won the Triple Crown. Judge has a shot this year. He won a batting title another year. 54 home runs, 50 home runs. Mantle also was a switch hitter, and he was considered to be a guy who struck out a lot. You look at his numbers, you say, what the fuck are you talking about? He's a contact hitter, especially batting righty. He struck out at a lower frequency. My dad always said that Mickey was a better right-handed hitter than left-handed. And righty was his natural side. But Mantle was just a complete freak. They said that he had Olympic sprinter speed. If he had, instead of becoming a baseball player, had gone towards Olympic glory, he was that good of an athlete. But when you're talking Aaron Judge, we can say this now, because the Mick, his last year of prime was like 1961 or 62 if you really want to stretch. He got old fast. Players aged faster then. They didn't have the training techniques. And in the case of the Mick, he didn't take good care of himself. It is the biggest cliche of all time, but it is the truth. The Mick was all but washed up by the time 1963 was ongoing. He could still hit home runs, but he couldn't really play the outfield. His body was beat to shit. It's just unfortunate. But if I'm asked the question, who is the best position player since Mickey Mantle's prime? You're literally talking 60 plus years since the Mick. Realistically, 1961, where he hit 54 homers. And if he hadn't gotten sick towards the end of the year, he had a shot with Maris. 60 plus years since the last of that kind, that tier of New York Yankee legend, the Mick. Aaron Judge is the best player the Yankees have had since Mickey Mantle. I'm eliminating Alex Rodriguez because of pharmaceutical scenario. And also, aside from brief stretches in 2007 and 2005, and what he did in the postseason in 2009, never to be forgotten, the Yanks never quite saw the Alex Rodriguez of late era Seattle and what he did in Texas. I don't think he was ever fully comfortable operating in Jeter's shadow with the Yankees. But as far as talent, A-Rod was a legitimate five-tooler. He was a five-tooler when he was 15 years old and skinny as a rail. He was hitting the ball close to 400 feet. That is a physical freak. He had a cannon for an arm and could run like the wind. But Judge is still above him. The best all-around baseball player the Yankees had, in between Mickey Mantle and Aaron Judge, is Bernie Williams. It's easy to forget if you're not a Gen Xer or an elder millennial. If you're a person under 40, you probably don't remember Bernie Williams' prime that well, because his prime was relatively short. It was circa 1996 through 1999. Bernie was a monster player. He had the misfortune, his prime coincided with the height of the PED era. So his numbers, which were stupendous, they paled by comparison to what Bonds and Caminetti and Juan Gonzalez and Albert Bell and some of the other big hitters of the era put up. But Bernie was a legitimate five-tool player. And when I tell you, prime Bernie, not as good as Judge, but he was comparable in terms of effectiveness. He had a couple of years where his WAR is absurd because Bernie hit the ball out of the ballpark, hit 340, draw a lot of walks, didn't strike out that much. Bernie struck out a lot less than Judge. He was more likely, and he was a switch hitter who was fucking lethal from both sides of the plate, a la Mickey Mantle. And young Bernie was a great center fielder. Unfortunately, fans in their 30s now, they watch Bernie stumble around later in his career. And I'm telling you, there's clips of him on YouTube in the mid-90s. That guy could go get the ball. And he had a really good arm. Not as good as Judge. Even at his peak, he did not have an arm like Judge. But he could go get that ball. When he would take off on a dead run and catch a ball in stride, I can still see it. Man, that guy was good. But this is what you're talking about with Aaron Judge. This is a guy on the exalted level. And the way I would describe it, as far as Bernie Williams, comparing him to Judge, it's like comparing a heavyweight champion to either Joe Louis or Muhammad Ali. Bernie Williams was a great player. He was a Hall of Famer who just didn't have enough Hall of Fame seasons, similar to Don Mattingly, similar to Ron Guidry. Bernie was a great player. Aaron Judge is history. He is a generational talent who is actualizing his incredible ability. And I got to be honest with you, he came up in 2016, right? He had his moments. He had a few home runs. But I didn't think that he was going to do anything like what he did, even though the Yankees were talking up, because to be honest, there were a lot of other big prospects the Yankees talked up who laid eggs. Hensley Mullins was going to be an MVP candidate someday. He's a hell of a coach, right? He was up for a number of manager jobs, including the Yankees. Guy sucked as a player. All the tools didn't actualize it. Kevin Moss was going to be our first baseman of the future. Who? Yeah, I love Kevin Moss. What a swing. Smooth as silk at first base. Not as good as Mattingly, but he could really play the position. Well, that didn't work out. Now, did it? Drew Henson was going to be the next Mike Schmidt. That's the guy that had Tom Brady's job at Michigan for a couple of seasons. That didn't work out either. So when they're saying Aaron Judge projects to be an all-star, yeah, I want to see it. Well, we saw it. We've been seeing it. And the sick thing is the guy seems to be improving. Nothing about him makes any sense. But he is absolute money. And he's shown it. Even in 2017, he struggled in the postseason, but he had some big moments. Certainly in the knockout game against Minnesota, he had the home run. And he had a huge hit in game 4 to tie the game. Ultimately, the Yankees won that game against Houston. Judge is a great player, and he has that quiet confidence like Joe DiMaggio, although DiMaggio was not nearly as good with the press. He wasn't a particularly likable guy. And Jeter. The irony of Derek Jeter is we all knew he was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Come on, Jeter was a great baseball player. But Jeter was a great baseball player also within normal parameters. Jeter's greatest gift was longevity. The fact that the better shortstops of his era, I mean, this is legitimate. If you go back to Nomar Garcia in his prime, Miguel Tejada in his prime, Alex Rodriguez in his prime, and Derek Jeter in his prime at the same time, he was the fourth best. He was not nearly as good a fielder. He might have been better than Nomar. Nomar had a cannon of an arm, but he was never really that good of a shortstop. But A-Rod was, if we're being honest, a way better defensive shortstop. It's easy to sleep on how much of an awesome baseball player A-Rod was because he's A-Rod. He always gets in trouble. Jennifer Lopez, the guy can't stay out, he's always stepping in. He tries to be diplomatic. He's been better the last number of years. Alex Rodriguez was an incredible defensive shortstop. He was a great third baseman too. But with all of that, Jeter was the last one standing. He's the only Hall of Famer in that bunch. A-Rod's not going to the Hall. He could have. But the PED, it's going to keep him out. So Jeter, with all of the achievements, all the money he made, all the respect he garnered, the fact that Red Sox fans who never rooted for him gave him a standing ovation, and some of them were crying because this guy, cliche city, this guy played the game the right way. That's Aaron Judge. He is very well liked and respected around baseball, even as he is slamming one home run after another down the opposing team's throats. And there is something to be said for that. I think it does matter. I do think that class and dignity, as DiMaggio, even if he sucked with the media, it wasn't as bad as Ted Williams. But there is something to be said for, quote unquote, playing the game the right way. And my perception of Judge is that once he really started to do what he thought he was capable of, and we saw what he did in 2017, even though he was not the captain, he took on the unofficial mantle of trying to put forth a certain image as the face of this franchise. These are not things I would have thought about as a kid. And make no mistake, the Yankees have had a lot of great baseball players going back to the 70s. But Don Mattingly couldn't run. And his arm, he didn't have a big arm. He was a first baseman. He didn't need to have a cannon. Yeah, he came up, he played some right field. He had a decent arm, but he certainly, Mattingly wasn't even a 4-tool player. He was a 3-tool player. Reggie Jackson, amazing offensive player. By Reggie's own admission, I'm nothing like Aaron Judge. And Reggie could play the outfield. He's nowhere near as good an outfielder as Judge. There's a reason why he became a DH in his early to mid-30s. Judge is a great outfielder. Teams don't run on him. He does everything fundamentally well. And this was what was always said about DiMaggio and Mantle. See, DiMaggio to me is the biggest unicorn of the bunch of Yankee greats because people know the name Babe Ruth with the home runs and they know Lou Gehrig. Maybe they don't know the particulars guy knocking in 184 runs, just stupid shit like that, drawing a ton of walks. But you say, well, what was it that made DiMaggio so special? Why is he, without looking at stats, why is he grouped with the other legendary names? It's tough to quantify his outfield play that everybody said he was the best center fielder who ever lived, even though he was fast, had a good arm, but was not a speed burner. I don't know that he was even in his 20s as fast as Aaron Judge in terms of foot speed. But it was the fact that he never took a bad break on a ball. They said he never ran in and then had to race back the ball to be over his head. As Phil Rizzuto and Yogi Berra, independent of one another, said, you rarely even saw Joe make a good catch. He was always standing in front of the fucking baseball somehow. But DiMaggio's numbers were hurt for two reasons. One was military service. You could say the same for Ted Williams. Joe lost 3 full seasons to military service when he was right in the middle of what would have been his absolute prime. And the fact that he was a right-handed power hitter. It was 457 feet to left center and 461 to dead center. The monuments were on the field, for crying out loud. Yes, you heard that right. The monuments were on the field because nobody could even hit the ball that far. You hit the ball 430 in the air, it might rattle around on the monument. It's just some really funny shit on YouTube. Go ahead, you Google that. Yankee Stadium monuments on the field. Yeah. DiMaggio probably still would have gotten close to 500 homers, but he lost a ton because the 420-foot shots that he hit to the power alleys in left center, they were doubles and triples. In any other ballpark in baseball, home run. They used to say if you flip-flopped him with Ted Williams, you'll reboot the Matrix, and you had Joe DiMaggio playing at Fenway Park, DiMaggio would have hit way over 500 homers. The years with the Yankees where he got into the 40s, he might have hit 70. DiMaggio was a freak. You know what else he didn't do? He didn't strike out. DiMaggio had a season where he had 600 plate appearances. I think he struck out like 13 times. Let me see if I can find that. DiMaggio's hand-eye coordination may have been the greatest that anyone ever saw. So let's see this. Yeah, 13 strikeouts. I think it was the year that he had the hitting streak. In 1941, the year of Joe DiMaggio's infamous, well, not infamous, iconic, legendary 56-game hitting streak, a record that still stands. It's 83 years later, and the closest anyone has come is Pete Rose. Fucking asshole. Sorry, I hate Pete Rose. Hate him. Great player. Hate him. For all the lies he told, for all the people he tried to humiliate, and then he had to go back and say, oops, I'm sorry, I've been lying the whole time. But Pete Rose hit in 44 consecutive games in 1978, 12 shy of Joe D. And we all know Rose was one of the best hitters, didn't have power, but he was a tremendous hitter, great competitor, all that stuff. And he got within 12, and that was it. Paul Molitor hitting 39 in a row in 1987. But DiMaggio, in 1941, you want to know why he has this legendary name? In 622 plate appearances, DiMaggio struck out 13 times. 622 plate appearances, 13 strikeouts. No offense to Aaron Judge, but Judge has had weeks, 1 week, where he struck out 13 times. DiMaggio was a level above almost anyone who ever played. That is why he was known as the greatest living ball player. You imagine hitting, how many home runs did he hit? He hit 30 home runs that year and struck out 13 times. Complete ridicularity. May not have been the nicest guy. He was not a very good husband to Marilyn Monroe. The irony of Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig looks like he would have been a real, great guy, great interview. They said Gehrig really wasn't that exciting or interesting of a guy himself. Babe Ruth was a character. Judge isn't a character, but he's great with fans. We saw him last week, earlier this week with Caitlin Clark. He's really good meeting people and making appearances and making people feel comfortable in his sphere, which is not something that everyone has. Barry Bonds never had it. Roger Clemens never had it. There are a lot of great players that just come across as, inert or sourpuss. Judge has it all. And he is, every day, living up to the history that he now represents of this franchise. And look, there is a version of Aaron Judge's career where he continues to play at this incredibly high level for another, realistically, he could have 2 more years of absolute prime after this one. This is his age 32 season. It's realistic to say that he could have another 2 years like this one. But he's so good that even as he declines, he's going to keep himself in shape and do whatever exercises and drills to stay on top of the game. I hope that he ends up hitting over 500 home runs. I mean, Reggie Jackson says 6. He's not getting to 6. He would have to never get injured again. And we know when guys get into their mid to late 30s, they start to get hurt. Look at guys like Derek Jeter and Alex Rodriguez. especially Jeter. Jeter, like, almost never got injured. You couldn't get him out of the game. He used to fuck with Torre. Mr. Torre, you got to let me play. Bro, you got a strained hamstring. I don't care. Get me out there. But as you get older, you become more brittle. And Alex Rodriguez wasn't that old when he started being sidelined by minor injuries. It's the way the body breaks down. 162 game season is brutal. But the idea is that if Judge has another couple of years in the ballpark of this year or 2017 or 2022, when he retires, people will look and say, this guy could make a case for being top 10 greatest ever. That's how much of a generational talent Aaron Judge is. You know, we talk about Mike Trout. Mike Trout's a generational talent. But that's how rare it is. When you start talking about players who were doing things, because Trout, they used to compare to DiMaggio and Mantle. But even Mike Trout, a guy who took good care of himself, you start getting injured. And hopefully Judge, the fluky injuries, stay in the background, no more fluky injuries. And he goes ahead this year, finishes strong, hits in the mid-50s as far as homers, whatever. Maybe he ends at 54, a wink and a nod to 1961 Mickey Mantle. But Judge is extraordinary. And I feel like people are starting to talk about this in this fashion. Mike Lupica, who I met 5 years ago, Mike Lupica wrote an article in the Daily News today discussing this, that Judge is not just the Yankees. He's not just representing baseball's, America's pastime. This is the guy. Teams wait for the guy, and most times they don't get them. The Yankees have had 4, and now they have 5. Mickey Mantle was a generational talent. Ironically, he kind of underachieved, which is absurd. He hit 536 home runs in his career. He won 2 MVP awards. He won the Triple Crown. How many World Series did the Mick win? 51, 52, 53, 56, 58, 61, 62. Okay, so he won 7 World Series. But he's a bit of an underachiever because his prime was so short, and he played drunk and hungover a high percentage of the time. He would have been even better. Aaron Judge does not show those kinds of self-destructive tendencies. Babe Ruth had self-destructive tendencies, but one thing that gets overspoken of or overplayed with Babe Ruth, they make it seem like the guy was always out of shape. He wasn't. There's pictures of Babe Ruth when he first got to the Yankees. That guy looked like, in the immortal words of Sergeant Hartman in Full Metal Jacket, he could take somebody, he could stuff him into a garden hose. Like Babe Ruth was a fearsome physical presence, not roly-poly until later in his career. But Babe was known to overindulge. Didn't eat well, drank a lot, but when he was on the ball field, he was money. Judge seems like somebody who is going to get every ounce out of his ability for as long as he can. And as a Yankee fan, honestly, if you had asked me a decade ago, are we ever going to see another New York Yankee that we could even... Well, people compared Bernie Williams to Mickey Mantle, but Bernie came up short. He didn't hit for as much power, and he didn't have nearly as long a prime. Even though Mickey's prime was not as long as it should have been, Bernie's was even shorter. Bernie's prime was like 1996 through 2002, was only 7 years. It's not long enough. Mantle's prime was at least a decade. And DiMaggio, unfortunately, it was a little bit different because of being in the war. But Aaron Judge, a monster baseball player, and by all accounts, a really good guy. The best New York Yankee since the Mick. This has been episode 277 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday morning with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, all rise. Here comes the Judge. Peace.